My grandmother, Martha Vance, taught me that every story has a twist you don't see coming. She was the master of them in the boardroom, a corporate strategist who could see 10 moves ahead while everyone else was still staring at the board. I just never imagined that her final story, the story of her legacy, would have a twist that involved my own utter devastation. Our relationship wasn't a crucible or a test, or so I thought. It was close. It was warm. I was her confidant, her protege, the one she spent her weekends teaching, not about balance sheets, but about life. I was the beloved grandson, the undisputed heir. Until, in one swift, public, and brutal act of posthumous betrayal, I wasn't. The will reading was a blur of expensive suits and quiet, shocked whispers. The room was filled with family members who had long accepted my position as the successor. They were there to see the coronation, to calculate their own smaller satellite inheritances. I was there to mourn the woman I adored, the pillar of my life. I felt her absence like a physical ache. Then Mr. Abernathy, the family lawyer for 50 years, read the final operative clause of the will. His voice trembled slightly as he did it. All my assets, my properties, and my entire controlling interest in Vance Global, he read, are to be placed into a blind corporate trust, to be managed by an independent board, with all profits directed toward a series of anonymous charities. To my beloved family, I leave my fondest memories, and nothing else. Nothing. The word hung in the air, a guillotine that had just fallen, not just for me, but for everyone. The family erupted. My cousins, who had been planning lives as philanthropists, on her dime, looked horrified. My uncle, who had seen his name on a building in his dreams, went pale with fury. But their shock was nothing compared to my own personal heartbreak. I was not just disinherited. I was erased. She hadn't even mentioned me by name. In her final act on this earth, she had rendered me a stranger. In the weeks that followed, I was adrift in a sea of confusion and grief. I replayed every conversation we'd ever had, searching for a clue, a hint of this betrayal. I found nothing but warmth and affection. The family, after their initial shock, distanced themselves from me. I was no longer the crown prince. I was just another jilted relative, a living reminder of the fortune they had all lost. I was utterly alone. A month after the funeral, I received a final formal letter from Mr. Abernathy. It stated that while the will was absolute, my grandmother had made one personal bequest to me. I was to receive her old, heavy leather suitcase, the one she had carried on every business trip, the one that bore the scuffs and scars of a life of relentless travel. The bequest felt less like a gift and more like a final, cruel insult. I was left with nothing but her baggage. The letter also contained a small, sealed note from her. Her handwriting was as strong and confident as ever, which made the contents all the more confusing. Liam, it read, some legacies are a burden. I'm sorry to ask you to carry this one. Forgive me. Forgive her? How could I forgive a betrayal this absolute? The suitcase was delivered to my small apartment, a place I could now barely afford. It sat by my door for a week, a dark monolith. I couldn't bring myself to touch. It represented the death of my future, the lie of my past. Finally, struggling to find some sense of closure, some way to move on, I decided to open it. I expected to find old clothes, maybe a few mementos I could keep before getting rid of it. I knelt and unfastened the heavy brass latches. The suitcase was strangely heavy, unnaturally so. The interior was lined with dark silk, but when I pressed against the bottom, I felt a hard, unyielding surface that was not the leather exterior. I ran my fingers along the seams and found it, a nearly invisible release catch hidden in the stitching. With a soft click, the false bottom opened. My breath caught in my throat. What lay inside was so out of character, so alien to the woman I thought I knew, that my mind struggled to process it. There was no secret will, no hidden jewels, no confession. There was a small high-tech spy camera, no bigger than a button. Beside it was a stack of encrypted memory cards and a small portable digital viewer with a charging cable. It was the kind of equipment you see in spy movies, a kit for espionage. This was the suitcase of a spy master, not a businesswoman. Who was the woman who had raised me? My heart pounded with a mixture of dread and a powerful, undeniable curiosity. What was on these cards? What was this dark legacy she had burdened me with? I took the viewer, my hands trembling, and inserted the first memory card. I had to know the truth. If you've ever felt completely betrayed by someone you trusted with, your entire heart, hit that like button. You can't imagine the secrets this camera held. I sat there on the floor of my apartment, the curtains drawn, the only light coming from the small glowing screen of the digital viewer. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I inserted the first memory card, my fingers clumsy with a mixture of dread and anticipation. What kind of secrets would a woman like her even have? An old love affair? A hidden financial ledger? The truth, I would soon learn, was darker and more dangerous than anything I could have possibly imagined. The screen flickered to life. The first few minutes were disorienting, shaky footage from what looked like the inside of a handbag. Muffled sounds, the clink of silverware, the indistinct murmur of conversation. Then, the image stabilized. The camera was now stationary, positioned perfectly on a desk, looking out across a room I knew as well as my own. It was her study. The camera seemed to be hidden in the base of her favorite antique pen holder, the date stamp in the corner of. The screen read 8 months ago. I watched as the door opened, and my grandmother, Martha, walked in. She looked tired, the lines around her eyes deeper than I had remembered. She was followed by a man I recognized instantly, Silas Blackwood. To the world, Blackwood was a legitimate, powerful business rival, a charismatic corporate titan known for his aggressive but legal takeover tactics. I had always admired and feared him in equal measure. He didn't look like a rival in the video. He looked like a predator that had cornered its prey. He sat down opposite her, his smile smooth and predatory. "Martha, my dear," he began, his voice a low, pleasant purr that did nothing to mask the menace beneath. "We need to discuss the quarterly logistics reports. My partners in the Phoenix Syndicate are growing impatient. The returns from the South American ports are not what we projected." Phoenix Syndicate? The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it made it sound like a death sentence. My grandmother's face remained a mask of calm, but I could see the tension in her hands, the way she gripped the arms of her chair. "The global shipping market is down, Silas. You know this. Your partners will get their percentage, as per our arrangement." Blackwood laughed, a soft, chilling sound. "Our arrangement," he mused, "was that you would facilitate our growth, and we, in turn, would allow your company to continue to exist. But your board is getting restless. The profits are down. My people on the inside, your trusted vice, President of Operations included, are finding it difficult to siphon the necessary assets without raising red flags. We need you to be more cooperative." My blood ran cold. Siphon assets? People on the inside? This wasn't a business deal. This was an infection, an extortion racket playing out at the highest levels of global commerce. "And what if I refuse?" Martha asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Blackwood's smile widened. He leaned forward. "Well, then things could get complicated. The authorities might receive an anonymous tip about that unfortunate incident in the Singapore harbor in '98. Or perhaps your lovely grandson, Liam. He seems to enjoy his quiet academic life. It would be a terrible shame if he were to find himself entangled in some very public, very messy legal troubles. He's a smart boy, but he's not a survivor, not like you and I." I felt the air leave my lungs. He had threatened me, and I saw it on her face. The one emotion I had never seen in her before. Fear. not for herself. For me. She was trapped, paralyzed by a threat against the one person she truly loved. I didn't sleep that night. I watched every single memory card, one after another, a frantic, sleepless marathon of my grandmother's secret war. I saw it all. Shaky footage of her meeting a compromised board member in a dimly lit parking garage, the man sweating as he handed over a data drive. A recorded phone call, her voice on speaker, as Blackwood calmly explained how another of her shell corporations had just been acquired by one of his. I saw documents detailing financial transfers to offshore accounts, all under the umbrella of the Phoenix Syndicate. It was a systematic, silent, and complete takeover of her life's work. Her bad business deals weren't mistakes. They were assets being stripped by a cancer she couldn't cut out. Her decline wasn't senility. It was the exhaustion of a queen fighting a hopeless two-front war, one in public to maintain appearances, and one in secret against an enemy that had her in checkmate. And then, as the sun began to stream through my blinds, the final devastating piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The will, the public disinheritance, the cold, brutal act of casting me aside. I thought back to the shock, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and I saw it for what it was. It wasn't a punishment. It was a shield. By disinheriting me, by severing all legal and financial ties between us, she had made me worthless to them. She took me off the board. She made me a non-entity, a civilian, someone the Phoenix Syndicate would have no reason to watch, to threaten, or to eliminate. It was the only move she had left to play. She couldn't save her empire, not then. But she could save me. The public humiliation I had felt was the price of a secret, desperate act of love. I looked at the camera, at the memory cards spread across my table. The betrayal I had felt was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of this new truth. My grandmother hadn't left me a burden of memories. She had left me a weapon. She had left me a declaration of war. And her note suddenly made perfect, terrible sense. Some legacies are a burden. I'm sorry to ask you to carry this one. She was sorry because she knew what she was asking me to do next. The days that followed were lived in a state of quiet, hypervigilant terror. Every passing car on the street outside my window was a threat. Every unknown number on my phone was a potential enemy. The knowledge I held was a physical weight, a radioactive core I carried within me that I was certain must be visible to the outside world. I felt hunted. I rewatched the tapes, memorizing faces, names, dates, letting the poison of the Phoenix Syndicate seep into my bones. The love and grief I felt for my grandmother were now intertwined with a cold, terrifying understanding of the war she had been fighting, alone, in the final years of her life. I was trapped, caught between three impossible paths. The first was the path of the law. I could take the recordings to the police, to the federal authorities. I played this scenario out in my mind 100 times. I imagined myself in a sterile government office, laying out the evidence for skeptical agents. But the tapes themselves were proof of Blackwood's reach. He had connections everywhere. What if the agent I spoke to was on his payroll? The evidence could be lost, and I would be silenced before my story ever saw the light of day. It was a gamble I couldn't afford to take, not with my family's safety on the line. The second path was the one she had given me, the path of escape. I could take the suitcase, this Pandora's box of secrets, and sink it in the deepest part of the ocean. I could destroy the evidence, walk away, and live the quiet, anonymous life she had purchased for me with her public disgrace. The temptation was immense. A life without fear, without this crushing weight. It was a siren song. But every time I considered it, I would see her face in the videos, her tired but defiant eyes. Walking away would mean letting Blackwood win. It would mean her sacrifice was for nothing. It would be the one betrayal I could not live with. That left the third path, the path that seemed like pure insanity, to fight them myself. I was an academic, a historian. My skills were in research and analysis, not in corporate espionage and warfare against a criminal syndicate. What could I possibly do? It felt like standing at the base of a mountain with nothing but my bare hands to climb it. It felt like suicide. Paralyzed by these impossible choices, I went back to the source, one last time to the suitcase. I sifted through the contents, my mind racing, and that's when I saw it. I had been so focused on the labeled surveillance cards that I had missed one. A single memory card, tucked into a small, separate pocket, with a single word written on, the label in my grandmother's hand. Liam. This wasn't surveillance footage. This was a message. This was the final chapter of her story, left for me to find. My hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with a sense of profound, final purpose. I slid the card into the viewer and pressed play. It wasn't a hidden camera view. It was her. Just her. She was in her study, late at night, speaking directly to the camera she had hidden in the pen holder. She looked weary, but her eyes held a fire I recognized. It was the fire of a queen who, though cornered, was making one last decisive move. Liam, she began, her voice soft but laced with steel. If you are watching this, it means I am gone, and you have found your way through the darkness I created. I hope one day you can forgive me for it. I need you to understand why I did what I did. To disinherit you, to push you away, was the hardest thing I have ever done. It felt like cutting off my own arm. But I was giving you the one thing I no longer had. A choice. The choice to walk away, to be free from this poison. A mother bird pushes her fledgling from the nest to teach it to fly. I pushed you from my world to save you from being caged. If you choose to destroy this evidence and live a long, peaceful life, I will not blame you. It is the choice any sane person would make. It is the choice I pray you will consider. She paused, taking a deep breath. But I left you this evidence for a reason. Because I also know you. I know the steel I saw in you, even as a boy. This company, Liam, it isn't just a collection of assets on a balance sheet. It is 50,000 employees. It is families, mortgages, futures. It is my life's work. The Phoenix Syndicate doesn't build, it consumes. If they are allowed to take full control, they will bleed it dry, sell it for parts, and turn it all to dust, and thousands of good people will be ruined. She looked directly into the lens, and I felt as if she was seeing right through me, right into my terrified heart. I can no longer be its protector, but you can. I raised you to be a good and gentle man, Liam, and I love you for it. But I also know you have my mind, my ability to see patterns where others see chaos. The world has enough brutes. It needs good men who are willing to be strategic, to be cunning, to fight. So I am asking you, not as your grandmother commanding her heir, but as one strategist to another, I am asking you to finish the war I could not. The evidence on these tapes is your sword. Your intelligence is your shield. You are not a soldier to be sent into the fray. You are the general who directs the battle from the shadows. I know you are afraid, but I also know you are capable. This is your legacy, Liam, should you choose to accept it. Not the money, the responsibility, the fight. The video ended. The screen went black. The fear I had been drowning in was still there, but it was no longer a paralyzing fog. It now had a shape, a purpose. It had an enemy. My grandmother's last message was not a burden. It was a profound act of faith. She didn't believe I was a victim. She believed I could be a warrior. The love and trust in her final words were a suit of armor. My grief for her was gone, burned away and reforged into a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer a jilted grandson, a terrified witness. I was the chosen protector of her legacy, and I would not let it fall. My fear did not vanish, but it did change. It transformed from the paralyzing terror of a victim into the sharp, focused adrenaline of a soldier before a battle. My grandmother had called me a strategist, and in her memory, I would become one. My small apartment became a war room. For weeks, I did nothing but study the enemy. The tapes were my intelligence. I watched them relentlessly, not with horror anymore, but with a cold, analytical eye. I mapped out the Phoenix Syndicate's network within the company, identifying every compromised executive, every point of leverage. I learned their methods, their fears, their pressure points. My grief became my focus. My anger became my fuel. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I needed allies. The tapes had shown me the fear in the eyes of several board members, men and women who were loyal to my grandmother, but too intimidated by Blackwood to act. My first target was Arthur Finch, my grandmother's oldest friend on the board. I arranged a meeting in a quiet, anonymous cafe. He came looking wary, expecting me to ask for a handout. Instead of showing him everything, I showed him one thing. I played him 30 seconds of a single recording, a clip of Silas Blackwood calmly discussing how he would ruin Arthur's son's career if Arthur didn't vote his way on an upcoming merger. The color drained from Arthur's face. He saw in an instant that I knew the truth and that I held the evidence to prove it. She recorded everything, I told him quietly. She was trapped. But we are not. That day, my resistance of one became a resistance of two. With Arthur's help, we secretly recruited 2 more loyalists from the board, forming a small covert cell within the heart of the empire. With my allies in place, we began to fight back, not with a frontal assault, but with a campaign of strategic sabotage, a war fought in whispers and shadows. From the tapes, I had learned about several of the syndicate's other illegal operations, completely unrelated to Vance Global. I used an anonymous, encrypted email address to send a meticulously detailed tip to international financial regulators about their money laundering scheme in Southeast Asia. I didn't need to bring them down. I just needed to start a fire in their own backyard, to distract them, to divide their attention. Next, we waged a campaign of psychological warfare. I identified one of Blackwood's most arrogant lieutenants on our board. From a recording of a secret meeting in his office, I knew he smoked a very specific, rare brand of Swiss cigar. I had a single unlit cigar of that exact brand delivered to his desk with no note. The message was clear, silent, and terrifying. I see you. I know everything. The man became a paranoid wreck, second-guessing every move, convinced there was a traitor in his inner circle. We used the information from the tapes to create chaos, leaking fabricated documents that suggested one syndicate member was skimming from another. We didn't need to defeat them. We just needed to let their own inherent greed and distrust cause them to devour each other. The empire, which they had seen as a prize to be taken, was becoming a viper's nest of their own making. The final move was mine to make. When Blackwood's position was weakened by the regulatory investigations and internal paranoia, I called a private meeting. Just him and me in the main boardroom of the company he thought he controlled. He arrived looking like a cornered wolf, his charisma replaced by a barely concealed rage. He started to threaten me, but I held up a hand to stop him. "There's no need for that, Silas," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This isn't a negotiation." Didn't play the tapes. I didn't have to. I simply described their contents to him in chilling, undeniable detail. I described his meeting with Arthur Finch. I described the phone call where he arranged a kickback from the port of Antwerp. I described the exact offshore account number where he had deposited the siphoned funds 2 months ago. I told him about the tip to the regulators. I told him about the cigar. He sat there, his mask of civility completely gone, leaving only the stunned face of a man who had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. "Here is what is going to happen," I told him, my voice leaving no room for argument. "You and every member of your syndicate will divest every share of Vance Global, You will resign from every board you have infiltrated. You will cut all ties, and you will vanish. If you do not, this entire archive, I said, patting my briefcase, does not go to the police. It goes to the top 5 international news agencies. I will not just send you to prison. I will make your name, and the name Phoenix Syndicate, a global synonym for criminal disgrace. Your empire, the one you built in the shadows, will not survive the light of day. He stared at me, searching for a bluff, for a weakness he could exploit. He found none. He had been checkmated. He nodded once, a sharp defeated gesture, and walked out of the room. He was a ghost now, and I had exorcised him. A week later, Mr. Abernathy called me. His voice was filled with a sense of wonder. "Liam," he said, "a condition has been met. A hidden clause in your grandmother's will was just activated. It stated that upon the verified removal of hostile influence from the board, a verification your new allies have just provided, the blind trust, is to be immediately dissolved. All assets are to be transferred to you. It's all yours, son. You've won." I now sit in her chair, in her office, looking out at the city she loved. The victory doesn't feel like a triumph. It feels like a responsibility, earned through a trial, by fire. My grandmother's final lesson was her greatest. She taught me that a true inheritance isn't a gift given freely. It's a fortress that must be defended, a legacy that must be protected, a fight that you must be brave enough to win. She left me a war, not a fortune, because she knew that only by winning the war would I be worthy of the fortune. The suitcase sits in the corner of my office, its purpose fulfilled. It was her burden, and now it is my strength. My grandmother left me a war, not a fortune. I'm proud to say we won. Subscribe to see how we rebuild an empire worthy of her name.